Community is a coalition. Powering Community is a coalition of Scarborough residents, low and moderate income tenants, and housing advocates. We advocate for affordable housing so everyone can live in a decent, safe, and legal, affordable homes. And we all know that housing intersects with all of the social determinants of health, and it is difficult to be physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthy without a home. And inclusionary zoning is a very important part of that. Sorry about that. Wow, there's quite a few participants this evening. Thank you all for joining us. There's a lot of interest in the topic of inclusionary zoning, and we hope that we can have a meaningful conversation this evening with such a high turnout. It shows that people are interested in the topic. And I would like to begin this evening with a land acknowledgement. I would like to start by honoring the land that we are on, known traditionally as Takaranto, which means the place in the water where the trees stand. Takaranto is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and continues to be home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties, with Takaranto being covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We also acknowledge the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We would also like to honor the spirits of the 215 children found buried at a formal residential school in Kamloops, BC. Through this, we are reminded of the devastating impact of colonial violence on Indigenous communities. And we are mindful of broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and each other through concrete actions of reconciliation. And Anna Kay will read the African ancestral acknowledgement and statement.
Thank you, Terry. I would also like to take a moment to do an African ancestral acknowledgement. I acknowledge that we are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrant, or newcomers in this generation or generation past. I would also like to acknowledge those of us who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of slavery and the transatlantic slavery trade. Therefore, I honor, pay tribute, and invite into the space the ancestors of African origins and descents. Also, I'll be reading a statement against Islamophobia. Lastly, we also express our sadness towards the increasing incidents of Islamophobia, such as the incident that occurred in London, Ontario a few weeks ago. Thank you. So I'm just gonna give a quick rundown of what the agenda will be for tonight. We already just went through the land acknowledgement. Terry will be taking care of the housekeeping of this. Also, we have 6 speakers. The first speaker will be Alejandra, second speaker will be Jeremy, third, Mercedes, the fourth speaker will be myself, Anna Kay, and the fifth speaker will be Kim, and the sixth speaker will be Regini. And then after, we'll have a question and answer period. And lastly, our next step, I'm gonna turn it over to Terry for the housekeeping.
Great, thanks, Anna Kay. So to begin, we'll just start with a bit of housekeeping. We just ask that you please keep your mics on mute. We will be recording the presentations and facilitated discussion. So if you want to remain anonymous, you do not have to share personal information, and you can change your screen name if you want to stay anonymous. Because of the high turnout this evening, we might not be able to respond to all of your questions because of the time limitation and the virtual setting, but we'll try our best to comb through all of your comments and questions. And although we're not allowing in-person questions, we want to hear your perspectives. So we'll also read your comments from the chat and after the formal Q&A. You can either send your questions directly to Ishrat in the chat, or you can also write them in the chat because we want to hear from you and we'll do our best to respond. Please feel free to take breaks when you have to, and we ask that you just be respectful to the presenters and others who are in this virtual setting. And yeah, I think that's it for me. So I think you're next, Anna. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Terry. Just before we dive into the discussion on inclusionary zoning, I think it's important that we acknowledge what happened today at Trinity Bellwoods Park with the removal of homeless people from the encampment that they have sought refugee at in terms of somewhere to be able to sleep and a temporary home for themselves. We must also acknowledge that what the city has done in using force to remove these homeless residents and just people, and that in this time when we're talking about affordable housing, that we need to think about how we treat homeless people with humanity, care, and that force and the abuse of police resources to do this is not acceptable. And I hope we stand in solidarity with the folks who are doing the work at encampment and the homeless populations that are forced into these encampments because shelters is not a safe option for them. There's not enough affordable housing for residents, and that this was not the proper way for the city to deal with this issue. So I'm gonna go on to the first speaker, which is Alejandra, who works in the housing sector and is originally from Colombia. She's been involved with the ACORN since 2015 and is the chair of East York ACORN. So welcome, Alejandra.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. Yes, I would like to comment about the encampment. It has been very sad to see that because there's no other ways to provide housing, only send it to shelter. And this is not how Torontonians wants to see other people, isn't it? But unfortunately, this is what the city decided. But yes, ACORN is not agree with that. Anyway, this is why it's so important to have inclusionary zoning for the city. And it has to be an inclusionary zoning that is totally like strong, not like the city wants. So I want to speak with you about ACORN, first of all, because it's important to know that together we can do really action and we can really gain power. So ACORN is an organization who fights for social change, and we have been working since 2004 here in Toronto, and then we are across Canada, really coast to coast. So we are growing. We are now 1,049 people, 149 members, and we are in 20 neighborhoods and 9 cities across Canada. We have been working in childcare, fair banking, of course, affordable housing, EI reform, predatory lending, and internet for all. So as you see, this is people, like normal people like you and me, that we are low income and moderate income who fights for social change. So different places that we have been. So can you please go to the next one? Okay, so before to start with the campaign history, because it's important to have a history where it's coming from, this inclusionary zoning and since when. Everybody knows that people here in the city, we cannot keep up with this situation, this crisis that we are. We cannot live 1 minute anymore like that. And we feel crunch as a tenants, as a people. We feel that we don't are valued. We feel that second-class citizens, and this needs to stop. And this is why we're doing these forums, so people will know and people will can call their MPP, call the city and say yes to inclusionary zoning. So inclusionary zoning begins with Cherry de Novo. She was MPP, and she introduces a private member bill in 2006 that didn't pass. Then again, she's still doing it. And then in 2008, ACORN partnered with Richard Darla, and he wrote the best something called inclusionary housing in Toronto, where basically shows that it's doable, that we can do it, that Toronto actually need it, and that we can, even though inclusionary zoning is not the cure for homelessness, is really a very important tool. It's really an effective tool. So then, between 2009 and 2014, again, Cherry de Novo introduces the bill 5 times, and didn't pass. Then in 2014, a liberal for a change, Peter Milchen, introduces a private members bill calling for inclusionary zoning, didn't pass. Can we move to the other, please? Then in 2015, ACORN took action, and I am so excited because this was my first action, and the first action of many people, and you can see there people from East York and people from everywhere in the city. We were with Michael in that time, and Dufferin Street, and then the other side you see the French part. We were with both Chiorelli and Ottawa. So the French, and we were asking for inclusionary zoning. Of course, this person didn't even came out from his office. So then, can we go to the next? Then in 2016, ACORN was there with Councilor Mike Layton, and that time, John Mahar was with us. We were with, well, you cannot see that, but Cherry de Novo was there. Well, you can see a picture, but she was there. We tried to pass she tried to pass the bill. And in the same year, the IC regulations passed finally, and the inclusionary zoning was given the powers to municipalities to create more affordable housing. So next, please. So in December 2017, the regulations from the province came out, but they were extremely pro-developers. You imagine they wanted to give it everything to developers, and ACORN say no. So we did in 2018 a big action of the Ministry of Housing, you know, in 77 Bay. We were there. Many people that you know that maybe are here were there, and we finally were able to speak with the Peter Milchen, that was the one who passed the bill in 2014 and didn't pass. But at that time, he was the Minister for Housing, and he met with us. He met with people from ACTO, people from Social Planning Toronto. I say wrong maybe. Anyway, and ACORN, and he hears all us. And finally, he decided to give us all what we asked. We were so happy. We celebrate. But next, please. Yeah, we won. But what happened? Those 4 elected. And when those 4 was elected, this became a nightmare in many places, isn't it? And many things. And he enacted a bill that is called 108 that take powers to inclusionary zoning and another legislation. So everybody was booing this guy for that. Well, of course, the developers were clapping, and the people who were happy with this. But we know that we need the housing, because we live this every day, the need for housing. We were very upset. Can we pass? Thank you. So then the city of Toronto, can you believe this? This is something that the city should be ashamed. The city of Toronto hires Berry Lion Consultants. you know, these people are the ones who do all the consultations for developers. Of course, what they're going to say? No, that inclusionary zoning is not good. Because, well, they didn't say it's not good, but it's not good enough to put it in the city. They say that only between 5 to 10% and only where the transit goes, that cannot be put in a Scarborough, that cannot be put in a Etobicoke. So what does mean? That now we're putting colors to people? Now we're putting more labels to people? So we didn't like that for sure. And you see that they want only 50%. Oh, sorry. And they show this show that they wants that the developers make 50% in profit. And for telling you the truth, I don't think so. We care too much if they make money. This is not a problem, but they need to share. They need to start to share with people like us and with people, with Torontonians that need it. That in May 2019, ACORN released this beautiful report that is called Inclusionary Zoning Best Practices. You can go, there is the resources. It's very interesting, you can read it. Sean Mahar actually wrote it and he did all the research and it shows that it's doable. And for people who have some concerns that the market is going to increase, that go up, it's not truth, it's a myth. So please do your homework, go and check these best practices from ACORN now in 2019, and then when we did it in 2008 with Richard Darla. So, and only us, you will hear people here that they will say the Matri wrote a report, and the various universities, and let's not go far, New York, and other municipalities very similar to Toronto has already inclusionary zoning. San Francisco, Los Angeles. So can we pass, please? Thank you. So here you see different people doing deputations and in the Planning Housing Committee in 2019. Then these consultations were wrapped into 2020. Well, then COVID came and again stalled more the process. That this is something that is very fishy because this has nothing to do with COVID, isn't it? They can still going along, but they stopped the process. And we are waiting for the final vote. And this is why we have been doing all these forums that has been so well attended. Again, I want to say a shout for you, people that are here today that want to support this important policy for the city, because really these policies like that are going to shape the city, are going to shape the future of the city. So this is why it's so important that you are here. So next slide, please. Thank you. So then, I don't know if you heard, you know, but Ana Bailao is the chair committee for the housing committee at the city. And she has been very vocal, saying that she only believes that if we pass between 5 to 10% to the province, is going to stick, meaning that if we pass 20 to 30%, those four is going to say no. But this is something that we need to get clear to everybody, or to send the message to everybody. What we need is a champion. What we need is somebody who go and fight for us with the teeth, and go and fight for all these people that we own. You know, we own all these people that are right now moved from the encampments. We own all these mothers, single mothers or single parents that don't have a way to put their children in a safe space and has to go to a shelter. We own all these people that live 3 families in a 3 bedrooms apartment. You know, the city owns us that. We need a champion that goes and say, this is what we need, 20 to 30%. And they say, no, this is other history. But we need to know somebody who goes there and really fight for us. And we have not seen that. We need somebody like that. So we don't care if the developers and Mrs. Ana Bailao say that, no, we need this 20 to 30%. So this is why we went Dofferin, you see Dofferin and Blue, people from ACORN on Saturday, and we did a petition, and people signed gladly. And as well here, this is your and Main Street and the Danforth, and people really signed gladly. I think so. We had 300 petitions signed for people in a weekend, in a hot weekend. So people really knows that we need that. People need it. It's the people who are asking to the counselor, to the city, that we need inclusionary zoning. Next, please. Oh, and I forgot that Brad Bradford is the other one that we know had seen nothing clear from him. So this is why we decided to target these two neighborhoods, these two ridings. And then again, you can go to ACORN Canada to see the inclusionary zoning. What the people want. This is a report that we did, and it was amazed how people supported that. It was 250 Torontonians that we surveyed, and it's awesome what they say. They really support people. I don't know. I had the last one, or this is my last one. Okay. This is our demands. Thank you. We want a minimum of 20 to 30% of units set aside. The inclusionary zoning should be applied to 60 units development. The set aside needs to be permanent, no 99 years old, no 99 years, because we don't want to give this to our grandchildren, isn't it? And then has to be deeply affordable. It has to be rental housing. And I think so. I had, thank you. This is what we need to do. We cannot wait anymore, a minute more. We need to be organized. I beg you, and this is a beg from somebody who has been seeing the worst, the awful, that you need to get united with some group around your area. Could be ACORN, you name it. You need to get united. You need to go with a group, and you need to be more, participate more, isn't it? Well, what you are doing tonight is beautiful, but it's your first time. Please continue doing it. Continue going, because it's the power of the people who is going to change the city. Because these rich people are not going to move a finger for us. And I know I'm nothing to be against to be rich. Well, isn't it? But they're not going to move a finger for us. We need us to do the change. And this is why powers is so important with number of people. So keep pressure politicians. This is more pictures of people from ACORN that we have been doing for over the years. And I think so we had the last one. And oh, this is so beautiful. Election time. Please vote, vote, vote. I cannot say a strong, saying more stronger. Vote, vote, vote. You know why? You know why we had a prime minister who says that he's here for the middle class? It's because there are stats that shows that low income and moderate income don't vote as much as the middle income and high class, you know? So I encourage you to vote. And I see so the last slide is that please go to acorncanada.org. You can call us. You want to speak more about inclusionary zoning, or you can call us and say what I can do more. Please welcome. We are welcome you, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. It is just before Terry introduce the next speaker. It is great that we have two community working together to host this event tonight, the Jane-Finch community and the Scarborough community, and talk about working collectively together. Different parts of the community, we're all facing similar issues, and how can we work together to mobilize and start this action. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry right now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anna Kay. Our next speaker is Jeremy Withers. Jeremy is going to talk about inclusionary zoning in Toronto City Hall and its implications for Toronto. Jeremy is a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto, and his research focuses on housing policy, the economics of residential development, and access to affordable housing in Canada. Jeremy is currently writing his dissertation about the production of affordable rental housing in Toronto.
Okay, hi everyone. Really always love following Alejandra speaking. So I don't know, so it always wakes me up. I'm sure does everyone else too. So my name is Jeremy Withers, and I'm a PhD candidate at Department of Geography and Planning. I also work with the Affordable Housing Challenge Project, which is a U of T School of Cities initiatives. Yeah, so it's exciting to see so many people here. I'm going to be, I've been asked to give a brief introduction to this policy and to talk about how City Hall has been looking at making use of it. So I'm going to begin by, do we have my slides up? Can we get, okay, good. Yeah, so that's the good one to start at. So yes, I'm going to begin by talking about how disconnected the price of new housing that's getting built has become from the needs of most residents. And I'm then going to outline Toronto City Planning's current draft inclusionary zoning policy and argue that this draft falls pretty far short of the true potential of this policy to expand access to affordable housing. And I'm going to conclude by arguing that a bolder policy with higher affordability requirements, such as the ones Alejandra has been talking about, is entirely possible. And if we looked at the experience of other cities using IZ, which we will, and if we look at the findings of a number of studies that have been conducted in Toronto about how much affordable housing we could produce this policy, it's very clear that a much bolder approach is warranted. So next slide, please. So when it comes, oh, that turned out a little small on the font, I apologize. So when it comes to providing for the needs of low and middle income residents, the city's planning process is really quite broken. Over the past decade, Toronto has approved record-making amounts of new high-rise housing, but the vast majority of these new units have been unaffordable to the vast majority of residents. So today, almost half of Toronto's households are renters, and they're on track to outnumber owners. But despite this declining home ownership rate over the past decade, for every one purpose-built rental unit built, 9 condo units were built. So we can see on this chart that it's predominantly condos that are getting built, even though this city is almost majority renter. And only 1 in 4 of those purpose-built rental units were priced affordably for the poorer half of renters. So that's just over 4,000 affordable rental units completed for just over 250,000 lower income renter households. So if most housing units being built in Toronto are condos, who's actually able to afford them? And a recent analysis prepared by the city found that to afford payments on an average newly built 1-bedroom condo, households would need to make over $106,000 a year. To afford payments on an average newly built 2-bedroom condo, households would need to make over $160,000 per year. So what percentage of Toronto's renters, that is households who don't already own homes, can afford these? And the answer should really sit with us. Today, over 90% of renter households in Toronto would find payments unaffordable for a new bachelor condo, or for that matter, a resale bachelor condo. And even if renter households tried to pay what's considered a highly unaffordable 45% of their income towards payments on that new 1-bedroom condo, only 1 out of 5 could do so. So if these new units being created aren't affordable to those who don't already own homes, who's buying them? And the answer increasingly is investors. In fact, a recent CMHC analysis found that over the past 5 years, the majority of newly completed condo units in the GTA were immediately rented out as investment properties. These investment properties, when they're not left vacant or rented out on Airbnb, become the least stable and least affordable rental housing in the city. So this is a terribly unfair and frankly unsustainable way to develop a city. Most new housing is being developed solely for the profits of investment property speculators and of developers. and the needs of most residents are left to grow unserved by the system. The sad truth is that our city has long lacked the power to change this. Even when residents come out to consultations en masse to argue the city shouldn't approve a development unless it's more affordable, planners and councillors have very little power to reject buildings on this basis. Should they do so, the decision would almost certainly be appealed by the developer to the Provincial Appeals Tribunal, the LPAT, which would almost certainly rule in the developer's favor. So this is an age-old problem in Toronto, and many of us here have been part of campaigns that have experienced this dead-end situation. And that's why it's really exciting that Toronto is finally close to the finish line with inclusionary zoning. Once this policy is in place, our communities won't have to fight these fights for affordable housing in each development, one development at a time, but instead we can come together and fight for higher requirements that will apply citywide. So almost 3 years ago to the day, after years of advocacy, the province finally permitted municipalities to implement IZ. And for about 2 years now, Toronto has been in the process of preparing and consulting on how to implement it. This September, councillors will debate and vote on the final IZ policy. It was meant to be this June, it was actually meant to be in a few days, but they just pushed it to September. So next slide, if we can pick up these slides. On these precedents, yeah. So Toronto is late to the game in implementing IZ. Hundreds of jurisdictions across US, Europe, and Canada have used it for many years, and in some cases, many decades. So today, cities like New York require many developments to set aside 25%, sometimes 30% of their floor area for affordable rental units. In Montreal, most new high-rises are required to set aside 40% of newly permitted floor area for affordable housing. They actually build half of their social housing stock through those requirements. And in London, England, many proposals for high-rises are required to set aside up to 50% for affordable housing. This is why housing advocates across the city have been so frustrated to see how conservative the city's draft policy is. Next slide. So in September last year, Toronto City Planning published a draft IZ policy that would only require 5 to 10% of new condo developments with more than 100 units are set aside for affordable housing, and only 3 to 5% of new rental developments with over 100 units set aside for affordable housing. So it's important to understand that in this draft policy, IZ would only apply in certain areas, which are within 800 meters of subways or GO train stations. About 2 years ago, as part of Bill 108, Doug Ford restricted the areas IZ could apply. It used to be cities could make it apply citywide. Now it has to only apply to these areas. Now, thankfully, these transit-oriented areas are currently where the majority of the city's housing development is taking place. But with this heavy-handed provincial interference in mind, it seems all the more important that the city implements an IZ policy that creates as much affordable housing as possible in these areas. So how much affordable housing is it possible to require? Next slide. So to answer that question, the city commissioned a feasibility study, which was conducted in May 2019, and it was updated in May 2020, and it's going to be updated again shortly. It assesses in 11 different areas of the city what % of the floor area of a typical condo development and a typical rental development could feasibly be required to be set aside for affordable rental units. So in this study, affordable was defined as 80% of average market rent. So for example, these affordable rental units would cost around $900 a month for a bachelor or $1,100 a month for a one bedroom, which is about half the price of most newly built rental units today. Mercedes is the next speaker, and she's going to go into a bit more detail about advocacy taking place to make sure these units become more deeply affordable, because clearly those only reflect kind of a lower middle income affordability, and some of these we need to ensure that some of these are provided for the most vulnerable residents who need those deeper affordabilities. But okay, so in these studies, go back to the previous slide. That's the one. Yeah, in these studies, it was deemed feasible to require developments set aside this percentage of the building, for example, 20% or 30%, if developers and landowners could still earn a level of profit that would motivate them to develop, even after being forced for those discounts, to discount many units. Essentially, if developers are still able to make at least a 15% profit margin, and landowners are able to receive at least 10% above the current value of their land based on its use, then these studies deemed that that percentage of affordability was feasible, because developers would still be motivated to proceed. And what they found is fascinating, what these studies find. The city study shows that it would be feasible to require 2 to 4 times more affordable units than the current draft policy would require, depending on the area. Next slide. So this means that right now, developers and landowners are making such large returns that developments could be made to heavily discount many units and still make that 15% profit margin. For example, the study demonstrates that in every single area of the city, including Finch West, Scarborough Center, North York, everywhere in the city, could feasibly be required to set aside at least 10% of their floor area, typical condos, for permanently affordable rental units. In 3/4 of the areas studied, typical condo developments could be required to set aside at least 20% for affordable rental units. So I'm sure we're all asking the same question, which is, what's the maximum percentage of affordable units the city could require in each area? And it was really frustrating that the city study didn't actually ask. That is, it only asks whether up to 20% is feasible. So fortunately, another IZ feasibility study was commissioned by the Maytree Foundation and authored by Steve Pomeroy in the summer of 2019. It uses the same methodology and very similar assumptions to the city study, and found that, for example, up to 39% of typical condo developments could feasibly be set aside as affordable in higher price areas like downtown and Young Eglinton. So 39% is a lot. Clearly, by neglecting to ask what's possible beyond 20%, the city study is unable to tell us anywhere near what the full potential of IZ is. Now, it's worth mentioning that thanks to a successful motion put forward by Councillor Mike Layton, the updated study will ask whether 30% or more is feasible. And we've yet to see the final report, but I've heard that, that there are areas in the city that were deemed that 30% or more was deemed to be feasible as well. So far, we've only talked about IZ for condo developments, but the city's feasibility study also found that typical rental developments could support a lot more affordability than the current draft policy is recommending. The draft policy would require 3 to 5% of purpose-built rentals are affordable rental, and the city's own study shows that in 4 of the 11 areas, at least 10% affordability could be supported, and downtown and Toronto West, at least 20%. So that's at least 4 times higher than the draft policy is recommending. And this is particularly significant considering these are the areas where most new rental is being built, and applying IZ to them is currently the city's best shot to ensure rent controls are applied to at least some of these new rental units that are coming up, to ensure that they're permanently affordable. Overall, we see in these studies that demonstrate a much bolder approach could be required of most new developments across the city without slowing down the supply of housing. So next slide. And that's why ACORN, Progress Toronto, the Parkdale People's Economy, and we hope a growing number of housing advocates from across the city are joining and organizing a citywide campaign for a bolder approach. After a lot of discussion, we're united in advocating for a policy that will require a minimum of 20 to 30% of new high-rise residential developments are set aside for rental housing that is permanently affordable for a mix of low and lower middle income residents. Having looked at precedents from other major cities and the city's own studies, we can see this would be feasible to require of most condo developments and of a large number of rental developments, again, without slowing down housing production. So I'm going to conclude now by just taking a big picture perspective on the potential of IZ in Toronto. So right now there are a staggering 194,000 new housing units that are being proposed and are under review by the city's planning department. and the majority of these are in high-rise condos. If 20% of these proposed units were required to be permanently affordable rental, Toronto would create an additional 39,000 units in the coming years. And this would effectively double the city's current commitment to support the creation of 40,000 affordable rental units by 2030. And importantly, these units created through IZ, they don't need to cost the city a dime. With inclusionary zoning, it's developers and the owners of the land which they're bidding to build on that are ultimately paying for these affordable units. By providing these units at significant discounts, developers are being asked to reduce their profit margins to more modest levels. So I'm really excited, that there are so many of us here, and I'm just looking forward to hearing the rest of the conversation, and looking forward to seeing more of you as we, in the last few months of this, push together to try to win a really strong policy that could dramatically change how we do planning in this city. So thanks a lot for being part of this, and I'm going to hand it over to my friend Mercedes, who's a tireless organizer with the Parkdale People's Economy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to go on to our third speaker, which is Mercedes from the Parkdale's People Economy. She will highlight on the definition of affordability in inclusionary zoning discussion. Her bio is on screen right now. So Mercedes is a community planner committed to movement building and economic justice in the urban form. So the rest of it, her bio is on screen. So Mercedes, the floor is yours.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Anna Kay. And thank you, everyone, to all the presenters who've already gone, and also to everyone who's currently here today. And of course, especially to Jane-Finch and Scarborough for bringing this really beautiful, unified force. There's so many fantastic folks on the call right now, and really looking forward to learning alongside you. So I work, as mentioned before, with the Parkdale People's Economy. We are a network of 30 different community-based organizations and hundreds of community members in Parkdale, trying to organize around issues like decent work, shared wealth, and equitable development. And kind of on that last piece, a really big item we've been trying to think about is how to respond to the rampant development and gentrification happening in Parkdale, which leads to the displacement of so many tenants, especially racialized and working class tenants, being pushed further and further out to the margins of the city, and understanding how we can build better solidarity and alliances between neighborhoods and between communities facing these types of development issues. So once again, inclusionary zoning we see as one tool in a huge toolbox of so many approaches to housing organizing and housing responses, but it is something we want to make sure is done right by the city, because it has so much potential, but there are also so many ways it could potentially go wrong as well. So it's really important to have a very strong, unified, and organized presence to push back. So today specifically, we're going to try to dive deeper into how the city is currently actually defining affordable. And I'd be really curious to see in the chats how folks might actually define affordable, because you might realize it's actually very different than how the city defines affordable. So one thing worth noting is that when you actually unpack the understanding that the city currently has in terms of what affordable is that they see it as simply more affordable than market housing. So for many folks, that might not actually be how you would define affordability, right? In terms of actually being able to live and to be able to pay for all the costs of other forms of living that might be more pressing, whether it be health costs, whether it be education, whether it be just being able to access substantive needs. I'm seeing in the chat, lots of people are saying it should be no more than 30% of people's incomes. So yes, this is a very common way that people will approach this definition of affordability. And especially it kind of encompasses, when we talk about it from a human rights lens, especially, a lot of people do tend to talk about that idea of at least 30% of your income. We're trying to think of ways to decommodify housing. So we'll unpack what that means in a little bit, but once again, just want to preface this before we actually go into how we're going to look into the definitions. So if you go to the next slide, we'll be able to see how the city is currently defining affordable housing. So the city's current definitions are based on market rent. And earlier in the chat, someone actually asked, why is it that rents are currently increasing? And this is in many ways because housing itself has been commodified and it's been financialized. It's become profitable for landlords to increase rents and to displace tenants. So if we actually rely on these market-based definitions of housing, we'll only continue to see rents soar, but meanwhile, we know that our incomes are remaining stagnant. So it's really difficult when you're using market rent as definitions for affordability. So here on the screen, you can actually already see, the starting basis for 100% market rate, which is generally how the city defines affordability, already starts at over $1,200 per month. And that's only for a bachelor. And as you can see here on the screen, it moves up per unit size that you have, depending on, how many people are living in the household and what the actual size of the household looks like. Another definition you might hear the city sometimes using around affordability is also around 80% of average market rent. So that's like about 80% of what you're seeing at those 100% levels. And those are often used by housing providers who are trying to provide maybe a slightly deeper level of affordability, but maybe still not affordable in the way that some of you were just indicating in the chat. So if you go to the next slide, you'll actually see how the city is proposing a new definition of affordable housing. And I'm going to ask for a little bit of patience because this is a pretty complex process. So we're trying our best to also define how this is actually going to be taking place. But even though many people said in the chat, 30% of your income should be going towards housing, even though they're moving towards an income-based measure, it's actually not necessarily the way that people in the chat might be defining it. So their income-based definition is based on certain percentiles of the average income across the city of Toronto. So as you can see here, a bachelor is defined as for someone who is earning at or below the 50th percentile of income across the city of Toronto, which sits at roughly $32,000 per year. Similarly, as you can see here on the screen, as you move up, one bedroom for one person in the 60th percentile, which means your income is at or below $43,000. Two bedrooms are meant for two-person households earning within the 60th percentile, which means your income would be around $63,000. And then three bedrooms are three-person households earning at or below the 60th percentile income. So once again, while we see some pretty significant improvements from the last definition of affordability, this kind of definition is still in some ways leaving people behind. So that's kind of what we want to go into if you go to the next slide. That's okay, awesome. So here you can begin to see what would actually be defined as affordable for people if they are currently at the low income measure in the city of Toronto. And so here we have some of the different rates for one-person households, two-person households, and three-person households. If folks are at a low income measure and they're only spending about 30% of their income towards housing, they should be, for example, for a one person, shouldn't be spending no more than $629. Same there, you can see on the screen for when it comes to two people or three people, what would actually be determined as affordable. If you're someone who's earning minimum wage, and this is if you're working full-time, so not even looking at part-time minimum wage workers, you most likely would not be able to afford, and once again, this is meaning that you're not exceeding 30% of your income, anything above $741. And we know that in the city of Toronto, it's almost impossible to find housing at this rate. So if you go to the next slide, just once again want to show a deeper level of affordability once again that is needed. If you're someone who's currently living on social assistance, so whether that be OW or ODSP, there are very limited amounts of shelter allowances provided to actually be able to access housing. So here you can see the rates that are available to people who are one person, two people, three people, and four people households on OW. And once again, that's ranging between $390 to $756 to afford a home. Likewise with ODSP, ranging between $497 to $918. So we're providing you just with a couple of the different stats that you can imagine at different levels of income. So if you actually go to the next slide, we try to put this a little bit into perspective. If you're thinking about how the city is currently defining affordability versus the deeper level of affordability that many people do actually need. And this is specifically looking into the example of a 1-person, 1-bedroom unit. So if you're looking into the market rent, because once again, these levels of affordability are still different than what you tend to see if you're opening up Kijiji, PadMapper, Viewit, whatever it may be. Because right now, the median rent in the city of Toronto is at around $1,800. But if anyone's looked up a 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto, you know sometimes it can even go beyond this, right? Now, if we're thinking about how the city currently defines this, once again, you're sitting currently at over $1,400 for a 1-bedroom unit as quote unquote affordable. If you're thinking about the city's new definition, and this is the one that's kind of boxed off there, it's still over $1,000 for a 1-bedroom unit. And you can kind of see who it's leaving out once again in terms of minimum wage workers, low income workers, people who are on ODSP and people who are on OW. So there's still a long ways to go to actually reach those deeper levels of affordability, and considering who's still being left out of these current definitions of affordability within inclusionary zoning and more generally within how the city's approaching affordable housing. So a big question we want to ask, if you go to the next slide again, also is about how do you think about affordable ownership? Because if you look at inclusionary zoning, you know, we're all here pushing for higher rates when it comes to both rental and ownership. However, the city currently is putting very different definitions in terms of percentage set-asides for ownership and for rental. And we're seeing more of a priority for higher rates when it comes to ownership. So once again, affordable ownership is also being redefined in many ways. So the current definition is housing which is priced at or below an amount where the total monthly shelter cost equals the average city Toronto rent. So this is still a market-based measure of affordability. The new proposed definition is based on housing of household incomes. So making sure that housing does not exceed 30% of annual income for households that are within a moderate income range. And this once again depends on unit size. So you can see in some ways where this is actually an improvement, but interestingly enough, when you look at 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units, this new income-based measure actually proposes rates that are higher than the market-based measure. So these are all questions that, you know, we want you to continue to focus on when you're thinking about how can we actually advocate around the city in terms of these new definitions of affordability. So if you go to the next slide, we just want to end off by talking about how we can maybe achieve deeper levels of affordability when we're talking about inclusionary zoning and other housing approaches in the city. So if you go to the next slide. So in Parkdale, in 2018, we created a community benefits framework for the neighborhood, where we were trying to respond to a wave of new developments that were coming into the neighborhood and making sure that they actually responded to community-based targets when it came to things like affordable housing, affordable commercial spaces, decent work, community assets, and equitable processes. So if you go to the next slide, when it comes to affordable housing, here were some of the key targets that we set aside. And interestingly enough, you'll notice that this is in alignment with what ACORN actually came up with on a completely separate process that they went through. But similarly, what we were hearing in the neighborhood is that people believed that for private developments under 8 stories, we should be trying to push for at least 20% of units to be set aside for affordability, or for units or for buildings that are above 8 stories for them to be set aside for 30%. Just as an aside, we also were pushing for on public properties and community owned properties for there to be 100% social housing, and also for improvements happening to existing rental homes, which we know many people are currently being rent evicted from. So if you go to the next slide, one thing we also did when we talked about those 20 to 30% set aside. So in a new building, let's imagine we had like a 100-unit building and you wound up setting aside 20 units as inclusionary units. We also wanted to break down how we could maybe imagine those units achieving deeper levels of affordability. So when we looked at the actual breakdown of the population in Parkdale and how many people were on social assistance, how many people were minimum wage workers, how many people maybe could still achieve what the city's levels of affordability looked like, but not what market rate looks like. We made these breakdowns of how we actually expected those units to look like. So we expected at least 40% to be deeply affordable, and then 30% to be somewhere around very affordable and 30% at affordable. Mind you, this was created in 2018, so we were still using some of the market-based indicators, but this can transfer to the income-based definitions that the city is currently putting forward. So this might sound complicated and it might depend per site, right? We were doing this based on Parkdale stats. It might look different in Jane-Finch. It might look different in Scarborough. It might look different at a very specific site, let's say where you just need there to be entirely deeply affordable units. So there might be different ranges you'd want to potentially explore, but I just wanted to give this as an example of what we did in Parkdale. And you'll notice here, we also kind of put some set asides for how many of those inclusionary units we expected to be 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units, and how much accessibility we expected there to be, at least within these spaces as well, and making sure that they were actually achieving universal design standards. So if you go to the next slide, just want to end off with a bit more of a potential radical model that you can also consider. So the Right to Housing Alliance in the United States is a movement-based organization, and they put forward a model thinking about permanently affordable and democratic development. We had a question earlier kind of talking about, are there ways to think about, would IZ actually be a deterrent to pushing for more social housing? And so this is potentially putting forward a new way forward to think about how you can actually achieve deeper levels of affordability that can continue to push at the citywide level. So this proposal that the Right to Housing Alliance put forward is thinking about how to actually move towards community control of housing. How can you decommodify land and housing, engage in democratic control, and push for renters' rights? But it also specifically puts forward a different way of thinking about income-based measures, which is interesting for us to think about. Instead of actually looking at the city's entire median income, it's recognizing that different neighborhoods actually have different income levels, right? And especially if you're thinking about specific lower income neighborhoods, the city's current levels of whatever percentile of income might actually be much higher than what's currently existing in that neighborhood. So they also put forward this idea of a neighborhood median income, and actually using that as a way to define different levels of affordability. And so you can see here, they put forward some examples of how you could potentially push for there to be recognition and different set-asides based on that neighborhood median income. So just wanted to put those forward as a couple different models we could consider, hopefully in the conversation later and in any of the future advocacy as it's moving forward. These are things we can consider when talking about how the city's putting forward definitions of affordability and how community-based definitions are actually formed as well. And I'll pass it back to the hosts.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. Thank you so much. Lots of chatting in the chat. So in the chat room, so that's great to know that people are engaged. So the next speaker is myself. It's kind of funny to actually introduce my own self. So I'm gonna be speaking on a resident from the Jane-Finch community, and also on the perspective from the Jane-Finch Housing Coalition and our stand on the IZ. And so this is my bio. I'm not gonna read my own bio because this is weird. So we can go to the next slide. I'm gonna start with the position that the Housing Coalition has on IZ. But just before I dive into that discussion, just to give a little bit of background about the Jane-Finch Housing Coalition, that we are a grassroots coalition of residents, service providers, and community organizations that just working together, working towards housing justice in the Jane-Finch community. We've been around for about over 3 years, and we are part of the Jane-Finch Action Network table. So this is a table that's made up of different, like the education group, all of these different groups that are addressing different needs and barriers within our community. So just before I dive into that, I think when I talk about my community of Jane-Finch, we're also seeing major developments that are happening in our community. We're seeing the Finch LRT coming in. We're also seeing condos. Fir Grove community is going through a revitalization project right now. Sorry, I don't know why I'm having a tongue twist on the word today. I say it every day. And we're seeing condos. We're seeing a lot more proposal for condos and more. And we're also seeing that now that many landowners are seeing that these developments are coming into the community, they're also looking at how they can renovate their properties. So we're seeing much increase in reno evictions and all of those things now that are happening because of this. So when we think about IZ and how could it work for our community, we are optimistic, but at the same time, we understand, just like many of the other tools, it has its limitations. And if it's not done correctly, it does not benefit those who truly need it. So those were just some of the points, but like, sorry, can we just jump to the slide so that I can see, like, yeah, some of our key demands that we were, just like most of the other speakers, we also agree that 30% of all new developments need to include IZ. It needs to. It makes no sense at its current rate that they want it to be. It just makes absolutely no sense. And also that to expand deeply affordable housing units, including rent-to-geared income units across all new developments, and work closely with nonprofit organizations to manage them. These units must be available to residents on social assistance or working precarious jobs or gaining minimum or working minimum wage jobs. Another point was that we also to ensure that all developments stay affordable. At the end of the day, we don't want to see loopholes that are created for over time where residents are being pushed out or due to significant rent increase, they no longer can afford those units. And obviously local tenants and residents who are in the community should also have first option to be able to move into into many of these affordable units and be prioritized for the affordable housing units, both rental and condo. IZ should also apply to moderate and low market areas. We're seeing majority of the how IZ is being applied is downtown, but we're seeing the suburbs that are also going through rapid developments, and that IZ needs to use an equitable lens when distributing these units. Where we're using this model, and also around like applying pressure on the provincial government, and I say that to expand inclusionary zone and geography, knowing that, you know, we have a government that is not necessarily for this, and not to make it political, but it is what it is. Also that IZ needs to include an anti-displacement and anti-racism lens, especially in communities that are heavily diversified with people of color. We're seeing as I said, my community is made up of very diverse people. And when gentrification and displacement is happening in these communities where they go, in Lawrence Hyde, all of these places, communities that if they're seeing major developments or also transit development, those are the first people to be displaced. We're seeing what's happening on Eglinton and Oakwood and all of that strip of Little Jamaica, of those people fighting to keep those community and their homes and their businesses alive. And most likely many of them, after the Crosstown LRT is completed, majority of them will not be able to still work, live there in these communities that they've made home for many years, many decades, that they have made these places communities livable when there was no interest from the city or anyone to make these communities homes. And also we should not solely rely on the private sectors to build affordable housing. I think this has to be the city and the provincial government and even the federal government to allocate more funding to definitely build in these type of affordable housing. And and loopholes, like how does it protect residents from push out and rent increase? Also looking at some of those things. And the units should be managed by nonprofit providers to protect against loopholes. Um, Sorry, is there another slide? Let me just see. And one other thing, I also, oh, sorry, yes. One other thing, when we talk about rental units, we shouldn't only just think about what I said just in rental units. It should also be about how moderate to low income families can also have home ownership, like move towards home ownerships, being able to afford something, pay into something that they can eventually own and pass on to their children and so forth. We need to think about it in that context too, and not just about renting, because there's many folks like myself that has a moderate income but still cannot afford to own. Mercedes showed like 1-bedroom condos. I couldn't even at 16, 17, 18, 1900, especially as a family of 5, there's no way that I would be able to afford at least 90% of my income going into renting or to buy a home. So how do we make this also affordable for folks who would like to own a home? So I'm going to move over now to as from a resident perspective. So as I said, my name is Annika and I live in the Jane-Finch community for the last 13 years. When I moved to the Jane-Finch community, I always thought I was going to be here for a short period of time. I was going to get that big job that I went to school for and move out and buy a house, and none of that happened. But that's okay, because what happened was I was able to now, this type of work that I'm doing now is so much more meaningful from the path that I originally had. So, but when I think about affordability, I currently live in a Toronto housing unit, so we rent. And every time I think about my husband and I said, okay, this is going to be the year we're going to move, our rent increase substantially, because we're making a little bit more money. So it becomes harder and harder for you to be able to move on, own something else, because every time you have a snippet of extra cash, housing is there to grab it. And how does, so how do you're able to save to be able to either move on to either another home or own something? It becomes very difficult for many families, and just like myself, there's so many other friends and families that are in the same predicament of not being able to come out of that cycle, that every time you earn something, somebody is there to grab another 30% of that, right? So how do I save that minimum 10%? I would not even 10%, probably even 20% to be able to own a home or to buy a condo. Like those things are foreign to me now. I'm thinking about how do I now set up my children to be able to do that, and that might even be foreign to them next too. So when I think about how the IZ could impact me, I mean, as a family that we've outgrown our space, and how do we now be able to still live somewhere affordable and still be able to take care of our family and know that I don't have to work 6 jobs just to be able to pay rent, right? And that is, I grew up where my dad worked 3 jobs and we're still barely making it ends meet. So, and majority of his income was going to our 1 bedroom that 3 of us lived in. So I look at those things, and back then the rent that he was paying, you would think it wasn't high, but now as we're seeing the rental market is increasing, how do we continue to make this affordable for those, and also ensure that those who truly need these affordable units, that those are the folks that it's going to. And I said it cannot work if it's going to be at 10% or anything below that, what it is. But also just lastly, when we think about just like I said, community benefit frameworks and all of those are just like, as Mercedes says, and some of the other speakers, these are like one of of many tools, but if none of them are done right, it doesn't benefit anyone. It's just tools that are there that are just useless. Just like when we write a report on how we can do something better and we never use it, it's the same thing. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Terry now. Terry, please introduce the other speaker. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Sounds like
Yes.
my sound. Okay, good. It sounded like my sound cut out there for a second. All right, so we're going to move on to our next speaker, and I would like to welcome Kim Marshall to give us her perspective on inclusionary zoning as a tenant from Scarborough. Kim is an active community leader fighting for affordable homes and poverty issues for the last 7 years in Scarborough, and she's also a member of Voices of Scarborough, West Scarborough Community Legal Services, and Powering Community.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. So I'm gonna give a perspective, I guess, from a random low-income tenant on disability and how I see all of this. I just took a couple random notes. Some of these points have already been addressed, but basically, one thing that really concerns me is the market rent prices. I think everything really centers around this fear of what the current market value is. I wonder things like why vacancy controls can't be reinstated. I wonder things like you have things like subsidized housing where you can be put on a 10-year waiting list for things like that, but why can't individuals specifically qualify for subsidies that could apply to existing rental properties that are already out there? I wonder things regarding rooming houses, why we can't just lift and get rid of these bylaws and fire codes that would require homeowners to invest anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 in having to upgrade their homes. But at the same time, a family of 10 people could live in that same home with no bylaws applying to them. So when you really think of a home with 5 teenagers who all live isolated lives in that home, it's really no different than 5 rooming tenants. So why are we so strict with the bylaws for one and no bylaw at all for the other? So I think these laws should just be lifted, really. They should either be lifted or applied to families, if you think of it. Again, this would allow us, with subsidies for individuals and bylaws being lifted, this would open up so many more housing opportunities. Going back to inclusionary zoning, how does that really apply to someone on ODSP if we're depending on market values, which are already way out of the price range of someone on ODSP? So I get concerned about things like that. The only way I can afford my home right now is because I've been here for 12 years. I have been protected under rent controls. If I was to move out and try to move back into my apartment, I would be paying anywhere from $400 to $600 more for the exact same place I'm in right now. So if vacancies were under controls, just like rental units that are occupied, on average $400 to $600 less people would be paying for the same apartments that are already existing. And well, everybody on low income would be able to afford a basic home at that rate. And these are basically just the types of questions I have involving all of the housing opportunities out there: inclusionary zoning, rooming house options. I had one more point here. One of the previous speakers had said something, if I remember the point, about asking developers and owners to reduce their profit margins. I don't know if I heard that right. Maybe he can speak on it again, about something to do with asking them. I don't have much hope in asking someone to willingly take less money home for them. You know, I don't have any hope in people just willingly giving up that opportunity to make money off of us. What I think is there should be some sort of enforced cap on how much profit someone can make on a rental unit, kind of tying into something similar to vacancy controls. I think there should be a little more of an eye kept on how much profit home providers should be allowed to make. And they need to remember what they're providing. They're providing a home for someone, and the alternative is homelessness. There needs to be a little more of a humble humanity involved with people who are providing these types of things. And perhaps it needs to be enforced instead of expected them to do it willingly. Yeah, that's about it. Those are all the points that I really had to make. So thank you guys for giving me that chance to speak. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kim. Next, I would like to welcome another member of Power and Community, Regini David, who is going to share our position on this issue. Regini is a paralegal outreach and law reform coordinator at West Scarborough Community Legal Services and also co-chair of the EI Clinic Working Group and a member of the Legal Aid Radicalized Advisory Committee and former member of the city's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Along with her involvement with community development and organizing with diverse populations, she has played a key role in the formation of many grassroots organizations such as Workers Action Center, Voices of Scarborough, Power and Community, Fighting for Affordable Homes, and others.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, my name is Regini. I work and live in Scarborough for almost over 20 years now. And Scarborough is one of the cities where we have the most diverse population. I think over 70% of the people living here are racialized. And also we have highest working poor. Housing is a huge issue. So many families, 3-4 families living in 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartments. I see it even on my street. And so since housing is a huge issue in Scarborough and many other part of the suburbs in Toronto, any kind of a housing initiatives are extremely important. We cannot afford to lose any opportunities. Power and Community is excited about the potential with some tweaks about the inclusive zoning as cities considering adapting a policy on inclusive zoning. There is an opportunity to adapt a policy that could accommodate and include deeply marginalized tenants for many reasons. The current staff recommendation do not respond to the realities of many tenants and exclude them from accessing the IZ units, as many of the speakers have mentioned. For example, people on social assistance, minimum wage earners, people with a pension income, they will not have access to these proposed affordable units, even if they allocate all of their income to these units. So therefore, we advocate clarifying the affordability criteria is deeply affordable. That should be adapted and policy approval in the policy approval process. Power and Community position is that we are in work in progress to amplify new realities and emerging issues stemming from the new policy. And we support, as many of the speakers mentioned, at least 20 to 30% of all new development must be dedicated to IZ. And all IZ unit must be rent geared to income. All IZ unit must be permanent, not just for a certain number of years. All areas of the city must be included in the IZ plan, not just area near transit hubs. Non-for-profit housing providers should maintain the IC unit and support with the city subsidy. And 6 is define deeply affordable in IC allocation to accommodate many racialized and equity seeking tenants. Neighborhood should not be treated as a market for development. It's where the home is. Ensure protection of IC unit by monitoring loopholes. And these are some of our positions. We look forward to hear more from you and continue to advocate for affordable homes in Scarborough and for low-income individuals. Thank you.
Thank you.